with that, the two wonderful faces that you see on this call, we have Rob Blaine from all the way out west and up north. Good to have you, Rob. And then from right in my backyard, town of Mono, we have Jake. Jake, good to have you today.
Thanks, John.
And then obviously myself, John Chapetta. And really, for those folks who are new to Agilicus, we are obviously a cybersecurity company. We focus on everything from identity to access and making that seamless and effective for all of your users. We operate in the world of zero trust. You can see we're quite spread out on the map, but it's really a shift from perimeter-based defenses to a defense in depth strategy. How do you start with strong identity and implement things like outbound-only connections to actually use that firewall of yours, block those inbound ports, and then move away from a VPN into a seamless user experience, obviously without sacrificing security along the way. What we're going to be talking about today, and this is a good one because I have this conversation quite frequently. I'm sure the folks on the call do as well. But if I pose the question to everybody, I'm not going to poll the audience today, but maybe I'll pose it, Rob, to you and Jake of, are municipalities frequently targeted by cyber criminals? And before I let you answer, I will say the typical answer that I get from small municipalities like yourselves are, we are just, municipality X. We're too small for anybody to care about. What do you guys think? Rob, maybe we'll start with you.
Well, thanks. Definitely smallness, remoteness, how far north you are, doesn't really matter. Everyone is being targeted. Everyone in the sector, from the smallest municipality to the single, unincorporated town, if they look like a municipality or a government entity, they are going to be phished. They are going to have malicious software sent to them. It's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Jake, anything to add?
I totally agree with you, Rob, with that. And the thing is, the other part of it is they realize we have to keep these businesses running, right? And we do run as a business. So we're targeted. We would have to pay, or we would have to get our resources back. And the knowledge that's out there with the threat actors, that they know we have insurance or can have access to insurance, is another leveraging factor that can lead to us paying. And it's huge. It's the amount of stuff that I see coming in just from emails alone is unbelievable. Now, like, that we have transparency into that environment. So that's my opinion. I totally agree with you, Rob.
And that is a good point. And it kind of bleeds into the next thing on the top right is cybersecurity solely the responsibility of IT? And I know, in the past few years, it's been user training, but why is it beyond IT at this point? Why is it beyond, your two seats and the people that support you? Maybe Jake, do you want to start with this?
That is a solid question. So I think it's the perception that it's always going to be IT is going to take care of our problem. But again, like with everything else, it has to be a culture and a mindset that your C-suite and senior managers need to understand what the risks are. And the risks are, it's not an IT problem when even ourselves personally are impacted as employees of the town, that our data could be exfiltrated and our information can be exfiltrated. That turns into an HR issue. And when it turns into the reputation of the town, that starts to touch into your counselors, and it touches onto the CAO. So it starts to really affect the organization as a whole. So the sooner that the C-suite understands and upper management understands this, the better off you're going to do. And thankfully in our organization, we do get a lot of support with that. So that's my point on it.
Rob, anything beyond that?
Well, that's a really good point. And it really spreads from the most junior casual employee that might only do 2 hours a month, but they have the same opportunity of causing catastrophic results as the person in IT that has administrative privileges. So it's really crucial that everyone has this security mentality and is working on the same team and not afraid to report or not afraid to say, hey, I clicked on something. Every employee is critical.
And that's awesome. And it does lead into something else. You're talking about council and how if something were to go wrong, it balloons out, and it's not just one person who's at fault. Even the user who brought something into the network, they likely didn't even know in the first place. They didn't do it maliciously, it was by accident. And so when we're talking about all cybersecurity initiatives, the biggest thing that comes up is, hey, I just bought X product 2 years ago. I can't go back and ask for something else because they might interpret it like, oh, was that not good enough, or was that the wrong decision? So in line with should cybersecurity be an optional expense, how do you get around that? How do you even approach those type of questions? Who wants to go first on this one?
I'll jump on first. It's definitely not a optional expense. It is a cost of doing business, and you need to foster the relationship and the trust with senior management so that they support you. And we've recently ourselves just got it so that we have a defined budget for security, so we can actually track security spending year to year, which is really a good feedback to the senior managers and the C-suite to let them know that we are actively doing things and we are not just sitting and saying we bought this 5 years ago, we're good, against 5 years ago's attacks and everything forward. It doesn't work that way. And especially when you're dealing with critical infrastructure. We run water treatment plants, sewage plants. The impact of a problem there, or even just something not working, is phenomenal. We've seen towns that have, they still have a bad name because of something that happened a long time ago. So that's really critical. And then, of course, in BC, we've got some of the stronger freedom of information protection privacy laws. So a disclosure or a leak is dealt with very sternly. And that's something that we need to make sure that everyone in the organization is aware of, but especially the C-suite when it comes to funding. And we like to blanket and overlap our security just for that very reason, is because nothing is infallible, but at least if you've got multiple layers, the chance is reduced drastically if you've got overlapping layers. So that's my short answer.
That's smart. And I want to circle back to two of those points later on, but Jake, what do you think?
I agree with everything you said, Rob, and there's so many aspects with this that you can touch on. But one thing I find has helped is educating basically staff, and including the C-suite and council and whatnot, and getting them to understand what the current state of affairs were. For us, a big turning point was when the Wasaga beach bomb blew up in our backyard, and we knew how serious it was. It wasn't just, the big organizations over there that were having problems. And that was a sign of the times that we really started to up our game. And like you said, to your point about infrastructure, Rob, like now the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks, formerly the MOE, the Ministry of Environment, who's involved with handling our water systems, they're starting to ask questions about cybersecurity now, and if we have policies and what we have in place. So the picture, the message is getting out, and the picture is growing. And as far as changing this, we do the same thing. We end up adding on services based on our needs and whatnot. We're trying to evaluate things. So I agree, and it's just I'm leveraging what's going on in the world and educating staff about those sorts of things and trying to provide reason as to why we're doing this. We're not doing it just to spend money. We're doing it to protect the organization and the constituents.
That's fantastic as well. And actually, it's a very good intro, because in a lot of these conversations that I like to have and with folks like you that I work with, I like to throw in a slide like this to really dive in, to show everybody listening, how good this conversation is going to be before we take a step back and formally talk about, who you guys are, where you come from. Obviously, two drastically different sides of the country. It's 1 day and 21-hour drive apart. I can't imagine if that was an electric car what that would look like, but might be a little bit longer. But Rob, maybe take a few minutes, brief intro about yourself, your role within the municipality, and then I'll pass it over to you, Jake, after that.
Okay, well, thank you. Ironically, I did start out on that coast, Ontario born and raised and educated. Then I moved to BC many years ago and enjoying it here. Um, my role within the municipality is one of technology advisor to all departments. We're a small team, there's 2 people on our team, and we're responsible for everything from two-way radios and telephones to our drone program, to our geographic information system, to door locks, water treatment plants, and the myriad of other technologies that we have to deal with on a daily basis to keep the municipality running. I came up through a background of government work, educational sector, a little bit in the warehousing and distribution. So I've got a fairly diverse background, but it seems to me that the things I see every day, the tasks and the challenges, are present during all industries. It's always there. The security threats are the same, and they don't recognize sectors or geographic locations as a delineation. We all face the same challenges, and we all have similar needs and fears.
Right on. Jake?
Thanks, John. For me, I am an Ottawa boy originally, and then migrated around to various places, worked in the States for a spell, mostly dealing with tech work and specifically in GIS. So my background's geology, GIS. I've always been studying in IT, and these days that's my primary focus is GIS, IT, and data. So a lot like you, Rob, dealing with technology, anything from installing GPS units in the plow trucks to, like you said, dealing with security issues on a SCADA site, and just improving even workflows in our environments and leveraging technology to do things better. And with that, it's been an adventure. And again, going back to my comment about with what's gone on in Ontario in the last few years as to how serious these threats have come, I evaluate things differently. Even working, say, for doing stuff myself personally, going to a medical facility, going to my dentist, and like having a chat with them about, like, you realize, like, how secure is your data? How, preaching to my dentist about these sorts of things, right? Like, that's the reality that we live in 2023. Is it's all about the data and preventing the bad guys from getting our data. So that's where I'm at.
So Jake, on that point, both you small municipalities, I hope I'm not mischaracterizing you when I call you guys jack of all trades, if not firefighters sometimes. And that's why, I love getting on here with you guys. But Jake, coming from a small municipality, what does the cybersecurity challenges look like for you? Like, if you had to sum it up in 3 key points, and those challenges could be internal challenges, could be external, could be whatever.
Number one, I'd say, is cost, right? Like, everything these days is expensive and continuing to go up, right? And I hate to say it, but in speaking to some of my peers and other vendors too, they see it too. Like, they see the big corporations who, well, the greed factor plays in, right? That they're bumping up numbers for just because they can, right? So there's that factor. The other one is again, it's like, well, getting the question is like, why do you want to buy this toy, right? Like, you feel like you're talking to your parents about bringing home something you shouldn't be, right? Like, so there's that aspect about justifying what your needs are. And third point, I guess, is getting the right tool, I would say, because there are, like, and making it so it is more functional than the Allen key versus a Swiss Army knife, right? Like, so, and I'll probably bring up some more about that shortly, but that's where I'm at. So the 3 points would be cost, buying in from the C-suite, and then making sure you get the right product, get your return on investment. So that's about where I'm at.
And that's excellent. Rob, are there any on there that you disagree with, or any that you would add? That
No, I don't disagree at all. I agree fully, and it's very evident to me and very painfully focused. We are 10% of the province of British Columbia's landmass. That's just a bit bigger than Austria, the country. We have a population of less than 5,000 to fund this. So introducing a $20,000 security tool is a great impact on our taxpayers. And these are the same taxpayers that I see at the grocery store, that serve me at the restaurant, things like that. So I want to make sure that value is always a key factor in what we do. And sometimes we do have to spend those big bucks to get the value, but we want to make sure that we've done our due diligence and spend it wisely.
So that makes sense. So, I mean, I actually didn't even know you were that big. When you compare it to Austria, that's hard to even consider sometimes, right? So going into the pandemic, obviously, when it comes to remote work, cybersecurity, I think we've seen more changes in the last 3 years than the previous 5 years before that. So in an area like that, what did this scenario kind of look like pre-pandemic, going into the pandemic? How did your approach to cybersecurity and where that was on your radar change, Rob?
Well, cybersecurity's always been part of the radar, but it definitely filled the screen. Day 2 of pandemic, and all of a sudden we have people transitioning from where they've worked in an office for the last 15 years to working from home, from connecting remotely, trying to get their home PC or our work PC transported to a different location. Our threats just exposed ourselves. Like we had a fairly tight control of applications and communications methods. We're opening up RDP. We're just basically putting a paved highway into our network. We have people with machines that we have never seen before. All of a sudden, they're enlisting in our network. It was, a scary time, not just because of the pandemic, but for impact on an IT leader. That was a terrifying time. We were making choices that we would have never made, but we needed to keep the business running. We were working out, trying to figure out new conferencing software. We hadn't really done much in conferencing, and we had implemented, our Zoom over 2 days, and it was just a scary situation. And then we have, the Zoom security leak, and the fact that they weren't doing fully encrypting. They corrected it quickly, thank goodness, but that caused a couple nights of, no sleep. And it just continued throughout the whole pandemic. But I have to say the pandemic has probably been the single biggest driver in tech change in the last 15, 20 years.
I completely agree. I mean, I've worked with organizations that they said overnight we had a 6-month plan to go to things like Office 365, and we just flipped a switch and said, let's see what'll happen. And then at the same time, to your point, Rob, in that there was investments made, whether it was the right investment at the time or not, people just did things because they didn't know what to expect. I talked to one municipality and I said, what's the first thing you invested in the pandemic? And they said, we doubled everybody's voicemail. And I knew they were going to get a lot of messages. We doubled everybody's voicemail, right? Like at the start, you just didn't know. Jake, what did you run into? I'm sure it's probably in a similar category.
So pre-pandemic, so for us about 2019, things started to change, and that was when we started to ramp up our cyber game, as I'd mentioned. And one of the first things that started for us was for myself and my partner in crime, Colin Seymour, to have remote access to our server. And we were a one server shop back then. And with that, this way we wouldn't have to necessarily go on site on weekends and do server work, et cetera, right? And it gave us more flexibility. So with that, we were the first ones to have access. And then the pandemic light switched on and we're like, okay, now everybody has to have access. It's like, okay, so we started thinking about what we needed to do. It's like, okay, VPN with MFA. And like when my boss at the time said, okay, it's go time, we're having to shut everything down, you better be ready to pivot. What do we need? right? And it's like, thankfully we had desktops that were dying. So it's like, okay, laptops for everyone. That's the way we're going to go. They're going to be remote access. And then it's like, well, how are we going to access our critical systems? It's like, well, it's the VPN that we have. That's what we're going to go with for now. And then we'll figure out the MFA, et cetera, right? So like that's, and like you mentioned too, Rob, some of the challenges with the with regards to the conferencing system stuff. Like we did have Office 365 already, but we didn't really do a Teams rollout. So internally we were communicating a bit with that, but for council to run council meetings and stuff like that, that was all done using not Zoom. That's what our upper tier went with. We were going with one of the other applications, and we ended up dodging the Zoom bullet at the time. So we were lucky. We were using GoTo for council meetings. So it was quite a pivot. So at any rate, that's the story there.
So that's a good shift as well, because it paints the picture perfectly, and it actually, two municipalities, different sides of the country, same problems at the end of the day, right? And everybody in between your two municipalities, I'm sure, face the same thing. And so going in a little bit deeper on that, Jake, tactically, what boiled up as most important? What did you have to first address? What are the initial steps you took into addressing some of those things? And I have the challenges crossed out here, because what I want to focus on at this point is, what solutions did you bring in? How did you identify what was important? And then how did you get that in there?
So going back to the point about, so like I said, we started in 2019 with some of that stuff, and we started building infrastructure, and it turned out we went through a major change, complements of our water system upgrades, where we needed server redundancy. So with that was another sort of lead into where the pandemic was leading up to. We had a new resource, that we had this capability, and we leveraged that, but not immediately. So what we had to deal with was, so everybody was rolled out with a vanilla VPN that we had, that was configured through our firewall, open source VPN, which was fine for the time. But the funny thing is, we were starting to hear problems, and I hear Don's voice in the background on this one, about why we were having problems with streaming council meetings when people were logging into VPN, right? And so that was an interesting issue. And then the other thing that came up was, our insurance renewal was happening during the pandemic as well, so we had to deal with a privileged access management scenario. So basically, between Colin and I as administrators, we had to start factoring in everybody else who was privileged access, which included our tax clerks and people who had access to ownership information. So we're like, okay, now what are we going to do? So with that, that's when things started to shift towards, okay, we've got to do something better than the VPN, because our tax software does not run well over the VPN. It was an antiquated piece of software, and it was very slow, and we would get complaints all the time about how slow it was. And it's like, okay, we have to do something differently, because we had the software installed locally on staff's machines, and they would connect to the database, which was in our server environment, over VPN, and we're like, this isn't working. We have to change something. So don't know how far you want me to go with that, but
hey, keep going. What was the solution?
So that's where I got an email from a guy I knew, and the timing was incredible, like a Patriot missile taking out a projectile in the air. I get this email from this voice I knew in the past, John Chiappetta, asking about, are you having to deal with an MFA problem? And that was the problem that myself and Colin were trying to deal with, is like, okay, so what are we going to do for privileged access for people like tax clerks who need to access data? And all we could think of was, let's roll out MFA on the endpoint. That could potentially be our solution. So we started looking at Duo, and we're like, okay, Duo does that. Okay, great. Let's set that aside and let's see what else. And then we're like, okay, what's John telling us? Let's attend this webinar and find out what's going on. And we're like, okay, this is interesting. So it does more than what Duo will do. And okay, so Then we started talking to you guys at Agilicus about, here's our problems. Here's what we're trying to do. Can we secure this antiquated piece of software that they're never going to put MFA on? Can we leverage your application to do that, and how? So that's how it all started. So I'll leave it there.
That is actually a perfect point to stop, because Rob, our story is very similar with how we started to engage on the multi-factor as well, and I think you were going down that same road, right?
We definitely were. We were a little bit later to the game, but we were going down the same road, the same questions, insurance, can we get it? How much is it going to cost? How many restrictions are there going to be on it? What do we need technically to have? We need MFA. Okay, how are we going to get MFA? Who's going to manage our identities? It just started, the meter on the taxi just kept running up and up and up. And then John and his group were presenting, and it took a couple passes to sort of dig out all the details. But each time we talked, we realized, okay, so it's not just MFA. It's not just VPN. And it was all these other things that were bundled with it. And then we looked at the economies of it, and the Agilicus was about the same cost as one of these sub pieces, but it did all of it. And then it became, whoa, okay, this is something that we can't afford not to do. And, it was, once again, it was a post-pandemic. We made a lot of decisions during the pandemic that may not have been the best for our security stance, but it was the best we could do at the time, given the situation. And we've been working constantly since then to each year up the ante.
And that's awesome. And it's crazy to see, because while I put some thought into it beforehand, working with the two of you, it's crazy to see how well it aligns in terms of same challenges. You're up against the same things, cost. You need to make, a dollar last as much as possible. And you need something that at the end of the day doesn't cause work for your team, because you don't have a huge team, right? You don't have the Toronto IT team. You got Northern Rockies IT team and Mono IT team, right? Which we're looking at a good chunk of them right here. And so I think that's fantastic. And if we dig into that a little bit, for you, Rob, what are some standout use cases? So you mentioned you had staff going home who needed remote access to things. You have devices that you have to be responsible for from third parties that aren't your devices, and they need access. What are some standout use cases that you found value in leveraging us?
Well, the first and foremost was just that identity authentication. That is something that really, we didn't have a tool to say you are who you say you are. And that just rolled out into many things. Our SCADA remote access, we had been fighting with it for years, where the operators didn't like our solutions, and whatever the solution was, it wasn't good enough. And that we roll out a VPN to them through Agilicus, and we're then able to, give them something that satisfies them, that they're happy with. And then it just seemed to be rolling out. We had changed copiers during the same period, and we started going to, if we've got boxes or cloud storage, why don't we have it so that the copier, rather than emailing everything all over the place, sends it directly to Box? Oh, okay, we need single sign-on for this. Oh, we have the tool to do this. Our treasury people, they're remoting into their desktops. Once again, that was a quick solution. And it wasn't a solution that took days, weeks to engineer. This was hours. And probably implementation of it was 15 minutes max. Call in here, and it's funny that we both have a call in this number two. It's been just taking this up and running with it. There's not a whole lot of learning. The uptake of it is very quick, and it enables him to, do these things that I need for my clients very quickly. And everyone's happy. It's been really it's been the tool that I wish I had in my toolbox from the start.
Rob, I appreciate that. I promise, we're not paying Rob anything on the side to say all that. I do appreciate it. And I'm happy to hear it at the end of the day, because when we started to have conversations, I said, look, here's what we set out to do. I believe in the product, and if it supports you, fantastic. Jake, looking at you in terms of what are some standout use cases that you've run up against? Have you had the same experience as Rob?
Yeah, this is where it gets cool and exciting for me, I think. So with going back to the PAM scenario, which was the first scenario, and the multi-factor authentication was changing how we interact with our tax roll software, which is privileged access, right? Our ownership database and information is all there. So with working with the folks at Agilicus, we sussed out what the possibilities were, and what we ended up doing was we ended up taking the application and moving it into our now virtual server environment and creating virtual desktops for everybody to access the software there. And how did we do it? We were using Agilicus desktop application, and basically a connector goes on somebody's laptop. None of the data gets installed or stored on that laptop anymore, and they're accessing it all on our server. It's all behind closed doors. And if you don't have rights to access it, you don't have rights to access it. So that's win number one. Number two was when Colin and I started using it. Like, as an IT professional, I find we have a tendency of saying, here's the tool, go and use it. But when I started using it, I found that I started shining lights into all kinds of dark corners. It's like, oh, I could use it for that, and I could use it for that. So that was really a great win, and which leads to the third component was changing over the way we access everything in SCADA and the migration that had to happen there. We were running 2 VPNs because we had our water system was a separate network environment than our admin network. So we basically dumped the second VPN, and it was okay, but it wasn't perfect, right? I no longer get calls from our water operator, who's another municipality of all crazy things, to access our system. So we basically we're small, that we don't have certified water operators, so we farm that out to another municipality, and they take care of that stuff for us. It's our hardware, and they can access it with their own stuff now very, very smoothly with Agilicus. And we are using a rather world-renowned piece of software that is typical in SCADA environments, and I won't use their name, but they had an application that, oh yes, you can access this through a browser to access your HMI, and yeah, it wasn't that great. And for the effort that went into it to try and implement it, like Rob said, the user experience that we were getting back from the operators was not great. But we've been working with Agilicus, and it's more time than anything to roll out, to be able to access an HMI on an iPad from a browser. That to me is amazing. And basically the full rollout's going to be happening in a couple weeks. They've been testing it for a couple weeks, and it's awesome. And I think it's super cool. So that's where we're at now. And what we're doing is we're finding use cases all the time. Like now, we have external bylaw staff that work at home, and they're part-timers, and they're accessing server resources, and they could drop files if they're taking photos of sites, drop files right onto the server by a desktop or by a connector. So that's where my analogy was with, say, Duo as being the Allen key, and Agilicus being the Swiss Army knife. Like Rob said, it's like, I wish we got onto this sooner. So that's my point.
I love getting calls from Jake, because it's either ideas that he wants me to share with my other customers that he just stumbled across in terms of use cases, or it's good news stories. And along the lines of one thing that you just said. So Jake, you shot me an email 2 nights ago, and along the lines of, you have another municipality which is a separate identity source, separate domain that previously you had to add users and manage. And you previously purchased tablets that you couldn't actually leverage because that web app didn't work. I got an email from you the other night about adding them to the system. Do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yeah, on the remote access one, and again about learning the capabilities of the system. So you had told me before, it's like, this is possible. I'm like, okay. I said, let's dive into this and find out. And I spent some time with Nick, and it was like, really, it was that easy, right? Like there was some tweaks that needed to be done on the PC, right? Like we had to install the software and the connector, but it was just a matter of grab your iPad, open the browser, log in with your credentials, and like you said, they're the other municipalities' credentials and authentication method. It's not Town of Mono's. Like we use Office 365 to connect to our applications. They're using Office 365. Is it Office and Okta together as a hybrid connector, and that's how they connect to our environment. And from their iPad, based on the credentials that I've set up in the back end of Agilicus, they can access an HMI that is on one of our water sites from their iPad. I don't have to touch anything that's IT related. I don't piss off their IT. They don't piss us off. It's like this amazing relationship.
That's the biggest win right there. I should just put that as the tagline on stuff. No more pissing everybody off.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the things we did is we did the VPN for our water operators, and organically they started using it with their phones. We used to have a dedicated laptop that they had to shift, change, and hand off and things like that. And they came in and said, "Oh no, we just do it on our phone." And it's like, oh crap, why didn't we see that use case? It was one that they just, if it's this and it doesn't need software, why not? So now they all use their phones, and it's great because wherever they are, whenever they're there, even if they're off shift, they can know what's going on. It's really, really getting a lot of positive feedback, and I wish we had pushed them in that direction, but they found that themselves.
And I'm glad you bring that up, because that's something that for us, coming from a cybersecurity angle, it's our job to guarantee that they can use whatever device they want, and we make sure that that connection's secure. I briefly touched on how we work with outbound only connections and closing the ports, but how our platform comes together is for that purpose of, at the end of the day, you shouldn't have to worry about they're on a specific device, or this third party has a device that I don't manage. Do they have antivirus? Do they have this and that? It's good to have, for sure, and we would encourage that, but it doesn't always work that way. So we feel that the users should work the way that they want to work, and it's great to hear that in practice that checks out. Jake, I cut you off there. Were you going to add anything?
No, that's okay. I was just going to dovetail to Rob's point and yours as well about that, right? Like when we first started down the SCADA upgrade project, and like you brought up about the tablets, we were like, okay, we've got this tablet. It's going to be in Orangeville's possession. Who's going to be responsible for updating this? Right, according to our policies, right? Now that's not even a thing anymore, right? It's like, you guys use your stuff, connect to our stuff. It's all handled through the way you guys authenticate. You guys know the rules about touching our stuff when you're in there, but we know that you guys are handling your own policies for your passwords, etc., and you're managing your own authentication. Great, everybody's happy. That's one gray hair I don't have to worry about, right?
and that makes sense. And really, what we're talking about, no kidding. And what we're talking about here, and where we come from, I don't have any yet, but we'll get there. We'll see how long it can grow. But what we're talking about is the world that we play in, and now you guys play in, which is zero trust. And the entire notion there is, in a VPN world, you say, I trust Rob. I give Rob a device. Okay, Rob on that device can connect into my network. And what we're doing, and once they're in, they're past the mode and they get access to everything that you already highlighted, Rob. And what we're talking about is remove that implicit trust. Never trust, always verify. And we go down to what you folks have been talking about, which is identity. and we enforce that identity no matter what device they're connecting to. And then we go into things like least privileged access and all this stuff to contain what they have to access. Because at the end of the day, that user, Rod, that you're talking about, who's on his mobile phone connecting to the HMI, that's all they need to do. They don't need to connect to everything on that network. They just need to do that. So you reduce your risk by reducing what they have access to, and then the way that they access it and all that fun stuff as well. So
there's a question. There's a question in the chat from Pat Elsher.
Let me open that up.
So Pat's asking, what kind of training or support was needed for your staff to adapt to the new system? How user-friendly did they find the Agilicus platform? So, Rob, you want to go first?
Sure. Like I said, they discovered the phone access themselves, so that was a zero investment. But we did spend time with them, showing them, basically show them once or twice, walk them through it, let them do it themselves, and then they're good to go. So very little onboarding. We have more problems. We have to do a document, train people, tell them how to fill in the right values for the VPN software and that we were previously using. That has just disappeared. And it's like, here's a website, go there, log in with your user credentials, you're good. And it's just that simple. It really is.
That's awesome, because really that's the way that I probably explained it to you guys when we had the first conversation, right? And from a user credentials, we're not adding anything new. So if they can log into their email, if they can visit a website, they can get access to everything that they need to access. Jake, what's your experience? I don't want to bias anything.
No, you're totally right. So for us, it was exactly like that. We did add on the desktop integration component, which added a little step in the process, because what we ended up doing was we do not mount any of our drives through our Active Directory anymore. We mount totally through Agilicus now, whether you're internal or external, so it's the same user experience. So we mount everything on our AD that way. And guess what? If people don't need access to their drives that day, they don't bother connecting. So it's, in our mind, from Colin's and my discussions about the concept of rolling it out that way, we thought it was a better security posture to run that way. And some things that happened along those lines was that we found out people weren't locking their machines and logging out from the system at the time. And guess what? They couldn't access their Agilicus drives anymore. Well, yeah, because the token expired, which that is an awesome security feature. So as far as the rollout went, there was things like that people weren't used to. But again, like a one or two pager regarding how to do a refresh to mount your drives or to do a connect to a remote machine, that was just the context of it. Whereas when we were running two VPNs, again, it's like, okay, getting connection to your VPN. And because we were running two different VPNs, two different pieces of software, a little bit different from the water operators versus the admin staff. So it was pretty seamless, and it was pretty low investment as far as training.
Awesome. And so for the people on the call who might not be as familiar with our platform, so our goal is we are web first. So if you can access a web browser, you can get all of your work done, and we want to operate that first. But the reality is some folks just like operating with everything on their desktop, and so that's fine too. And so within that web portal, we have a button that takes everything that you have permission to access. So if Jake says you're in the finance group and the finance group has access to these applications and these file shares, then you click a button, and what that does is it mounts everything on your desktop. And then periodically, instead of going to a website, you just get a pop-up that says, hey, log in. And then we give you we basically issue you credentials. They expire at a certain period of time, and then you do things like multi-factor before you access. File shares would be a good example. And then I'm not going to go too much into the details here, because often it's better to do it in front of a diagram. But what we're doing for everybody, actually, not just Jake and Rob, but if they do file share access, we're doing that over WebDAV. So we're doing SMB shares over WebDAV, which is important because the way that, if ransomware gets on a device, often travels through SMB shares. And so the way that we connect to things blocks the way that ransomware travels. So one device might get infected, but it's not going to spread like wildfire through your whole network. And then what I'm going to do, just conscious of time, we have about 13 minutes left. Let's talk about ROI, because this is a hard one. And admittedly, it's hard. I get this question all the time. What's the instant results we can see? And, the reality is this is not a better machine that's going to give you X more output. Our goal is your users have a better experience. You save time and effort when you need to roll things out. You get less calls about, hey, my VPN's not working and all this other stuff. And then the ROI is really the proactive measure that you're taking to make sure something much, much larger doesn't happen down the road. But it's all fine and good to say that. But what I want to know is from your side, how have you internally quantified this ROI? Was there any specific features, capabilities that you came across that you said, okay, this right here does it for me? Rob, I know you made the awesome comment that you couldn't afford not to do it, but maybe you want to take this one first and elaborate a little bit?
Most definitely. The ROI was almost instantaneous for us. We needed an identity provider, first and foremost. And the cost of that identity provider versus the cost of your full suite was within $1. So that really meant that everything else that you offer was $1. I can't find a VPN for $1. I can't find remote access securely for $1. So really, we needed that authentication of the user. We paid for that, and every other feature was a freebie. Is the way I sold it to my executive, and they grasped it. It wasn't a smoke show or anything like that. It was plain easy math. Here's this cost, here's this cost, and here's the things we won't have to buy. And it became an instantaneous, yeah, that's the right thing to do. And I haven't heard any complaints about it at all. So I appreciate that, and I appreciate how Agilicus was willing to work with us and understand our situation before saying, here's your big price tag. They looked and it was really scaled to what we need and what we were using, not a one size fits all. You're a municipality, okay, it's $28,000 a year, here you go. That wasn't the case. There was a lot of thought went into it and a lot of care went into it. So I really appreciate that. That made it just that much easier.
I appreciate those words, Rob, honestly, and I know the entire team does, because when we set out, years ago to start down this path, really what we looked at is, why can't all municipalities in Canada have the strongest level of security, the level of security you'd expect from Google and Apple and all these organizations? And so when the team started to create a product like this, they said, okay, zero trust is the way forward for sure. But zero trust is an architecture, it's an approach, it's a strategy. And so within that approach and architecture, what are the components that you need? And you listed off a few of them, which are awesome, right? You need strong identity, strong authentication. Okay, what's our answer to that? Leverage what you already have. You need multi-factor. Bake it in, so you just have to turn it on. You need least privilege, reverse proxies, all this stuff, right? And so I'm glad you noticed that without, us trying to ram that down your throat, right? You saw value, and then you said, oh, by the way, I get all this other stuff. Jake, in terms of ROI, how do you, justify the ROI? How do you quantify it? What are some standout things?
So going back on the adventure with you guys, like Rob said, it was what you guys did with us was unheard of. You spent time with us to go through and really get under the hood as to what our challenge was, and that was, how do we deal with this antiquated piece of software to secure it? Like, we never thought we'd be able to meet that requirement for MFA and PAM and all in one bucket. And there was no way that Duo would have been able to do that for us. Maybe it could have, but like, for the cost for what it was compared to with what Agilicus was, it's like Rob said, it would be equivalent. But again, you're buying the Allen key versus the Swiss Army knife. Which would you rather have? So, and we further leveraged our return on investment by turning our treasurer into the use case. So we started with him, and he was our guinea pig for accessing the software that he uses all the time. And he saw the difference in how it was over VPN versus how we ended up doing it over Agilicus. And it was a night and day thing. And it's just grown since then. Like, we got rid of a second VPN. We no longer use VPN, right? That's, like you said about your comment about creating the fire. Well, VPN gives you the keys to everything. If you're gonna, you can't restrict where people go necessarily with a VPN unless it's an expensive one. And so, how many tools are you going to have to buy? Like, to Rob's point about making sure your environment's secure, identity provider, VPN, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas what you're offering and what Agilicus is offering is it can do all of these things. Like, I go back to even the example about the water system browser app, and it's like, yeah, well, guess what? Agilicus can do that and just throw it on your browser for you. And away you go. There's nothing more complicated than that if the permissions are there, right? Like, it's just like, why wasn't I doing this before? Why was I believing what our water integrators were trying to provide us based on what they knew, right? So it's been incredible, and we keep thinking about. I'll look at your diagram and think about the next dream that we have to deal with, right? The next thing that we need to capture with it. And again, yesterday I got a call from our water authority. Hey, Jake, I got a new laptop. I can't access the SCADA machines. Okay, and I looked into seeing whether it was an issue on our end or something like that, and all we had to do was reinstall the desktop integration for him. And I set up a Teams meeting. We met virtually. I watched what he did. I ran him through, okay, go to this link for Agilicus, log in as you, download the desktop integration, and away you go. And he was back up and running in 15 minutes. No call to IT. I didn't touch his stuff. Their IT won't be mad at me, right? Like, just he got back in the game, and it was all good. So that's return on investment right there.
And because that kind of stuff, it adds up over time, right?
If I could add one more thing, that the intangible that you never really think of, but is a huge return on the investment, is the ability. We're 3 hours different time, so that reduces the contact day. We found that we can go on to your chat, post a question at 5 o'clock our time, and lo and behold, someone's back to us like instantly. And in some cases, it's people high in the company or people that are actually writing the code. It's not a tier 1 tech support that says, well, have you turned it off and on? Well, have you done this? Okay, I'm going to have to forward you to someone else. You're put in touch with the person that can physically or logically make the changes or show you what you need to do automatically, without waiting, without playing phone tag for a couple of days. And that is, invaluable. That's a level of support that is, we have white glove support of some items, and we don't get that good of support. So I really have to say that's a value that doesn't show up, but it's there, and it is a lifesaver.
That's awesome to hear, and I'll make sure that I do not pop up on the chat, because I would be that level 1 who says, "Well, have you turned it off and on?" but Jake, go ahead.
Further to what Rob's comment was, the other thing that things had been revealed to us were, how it is when you roll out something new and you get the squeaking from people about, oh, well, it's Agilicus's fault. It's like, no, you turned off your remote desktop. That's why you can't access it, right? But so stuff like that would come up, but also, like, your guys' support shone some light into some things that we didn't have right. Like, as an example, when we migrated from our old server to our new server, well, guess what? People's laptops still had references to the old server, and it was causing problems with the way the drives were mounting, and it was causing performance issues. Totally on us that we didn't purge those references. But, like, how clean is Microsoft, right? It's not really a problem that is an Agilicus problem. It's more of a Microsoft problem. So those are the sorts of things that would end up getting revealed. And well, we had a problem with our DNS too, that you guys revealed to us that we had references to our old DNS on the new server that we forgot to turn off. And it was like people were complaining. And it's like, again, you guys helped us. You didn't have to. You guys could have said, no, it's your problem, figure it out, right? But you guys revealed that for us because you could see what was going on. So at any rate, like that's, again, value added, and like the way you guys bring it to the table.
That's awesome. And that's good to hear, right? Because, you know, at the end of the day, like yourselves and the other folks on this call who sit in IT, you only hear the complaints, right? People only call you when something goes wrong. Nobody picks up the phone and says, hey, Rob, you've been doing a great job, right? And like, that's just the reality of our roles. And so I know I certainly appreciate it hearing it directly from you guys, but I know our entire team does. And Jake, you've been great to pop up every now and then and say, hey, we just did this. It was phenomenal. Thank you. And I know, you know, it really helps them out too, because again, this is, at the end of the day, our platform is the brainchild of all the sweat and tears and effort that went into it, right? And so they really do appreciate that. Final few minutes here. What I want to ask, I'm going to ask a two-part question and pose it to you guys. So to your peers listening in, how do they know they're on the right track with cybersecurity initiatives? And then what are you looking forward to on your roadmap? What's on the roadmap for next year? Rob, do you want to take those?
Sure. First part, you know, it's never really there until you test that it's there. It's like a backup. Unless you can restore from it, it's not there. So you do need some form of pen testing, you know, an outside party checking your equipment, checking the access, seeing if they can get into your systems and that. So that's the first part. Going forward, it's a case of I need to spend more time looking at your diagram, because that diagram is your best salesperson. And you know,
hey,
second best.
Hold on a second.
Because looking at it and you have the time to think and then realize that, okay, what we've assumed is a boundary is no longer a boundary. It's reachable. It's controllable. And just, you know, implement as much as we can, get as much value out of the package as we can. And, you know, it's like Lego almost. What do you want to build today? It really is. And that's, it's exciting to have a tool that is like that you're not constantly pushing up against its limitations. It's great. Refreshing.
Jake, over to you.
So I guess my response to the first part is, how are you doing with your cyber insurance if you're trying to seek it? Are you going to get it, or are you not going to get it? Because that's something that we evaluate every year. And, you know, thus far, we've been able to stay ahead of the requirements and at least meet them. So every time we're mentioning what products we have in our bag of tricks, we're doing well with that. So as far as what's next, that's a good question. What's next is to get others into, well, one thing that we're dealing with, and you're aware of it, John, is getting rid of TeamViewer, right? For people who are doing, and there's another example, right? We talked about VPN. We talked about a piece of software that will help for authentication. We talked about a multi-factor authenticator, and then we got TeamViewer too, right? Like, so we're looking at getting TeamViewer for based on the cost and whatnot for that Colin and I are using, as well as for our water integrator, right? So we're getting them off of TeamViewer and putting them onto the Agilicus platform so they can access our stuff and that they can do what they need to do for installs, etc., on our HMIs and on our SCADA servers. So that's in the very near future as far as the horizon goes. And like I mentioned to you, a fun, simple little thing about how we want to have a remote machine or have a machine at our front counter and allow for staff to access their own resources on their desktop from that. And I started to think, well, maybe we could do that with Agilicus. So there's all kinds of capabilities. It's just so it's knocking those problems off. But those are the ones that are in the near future. And like Rob said, see what's on the roadmap and see where that takes you.
That, and I mean, both of those are awesome, right? And I'm glad to hear it, and great advice. Being that we are at the top of the hour, I feel like I could talk to you guys all afternoon. And hopefully, maybe not so much in the winter, Rob, but maybe next year I can make my way that way, or we can find each other at a MISA or something like that. But I might skip the next few months if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem.
And Jake, I mean, as always, I'm sure I'll poke you in a few weeks and I'll bump into you somewhere. But I do appreciate you two taking the time and coming on and to share your experience, because at the end of the day, your experience are what matters, right? It's what drives the next customers to come on board and to speak with us and to partner with us. And so I do appreciate that. And for all the folks listening in, my contact info is right here. I would, more than encourage you to reach out, get a demo, have a trial. We can help you set up a trial so you can test drive it, have the keys to the Ferrari for a few weeks and see if we're all lying to you or not. But I do hope and think you'd find value from it. With that, gentlemen, I'll thank you again for taking the time. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully we'll talk again soon. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.